He had one simple job, to drop off a package and move on to his next stop. But the moment he stepped onto that porch, everything changed. The polite smile on his face faded when suspicious eyes appeared behind the curtains. Voices whispered. Doors locked. Seconds later, he wasn't just a delivery driver, he was a threat. What began as a routine stop turned into a test of belonging, dignity, and survival. How could a simple delivery expose something this ugly, this real, in broad daylight? Marcus had worked this route for almost 2 years. Every morning he loaded his van, humming softly as the sun began to rise over the city. He prided himself on never missing a delivery. Rain, snow, or heat, it didn't matter. Most neighbors knew him by his wave and the rhythm of his engine pulling up at the same time each week. He loved that routine. It meant normalcy, peace, and a sense of purpose. That afternoon felt no different. The air smelled faintly of summer rain. The radio played an old tune, and Marcus checked his GPS for the next stop, a quiet suburban cul-de-sac he hadn't visited before. The houses looked freshly painted, lawns perfectly trimmed, and flags fluttered gently in the breeze. He smiled, thinking, easy one. I'll be done early today. As he slowed near the driveway, a subtle unease stirred. Something he couldn't name. One figure paused mid-lawn mowing to stare. Curtains twitched. It lasted only a second, but it clung to him longer than it should have. Still, Marcus brushed it off and grabbed the package. After all, it was just another address, another doorstep, another delivery. What he didn't realize was that beyond that neat white fence, the rules of belonging were about to change, fast. Marcus balanced the small brown box in one hand and stepped out of the van. The street was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you hear your own heartbeat. He walked up the driveway, nodded politely at the figure across the street, and placed the package carefully on the doormat. It should have been a 2-minute stop, but that's when he heard it, the snap of a screen door. A voice called out sharp and distrustful, "Can I help you?" He turned, surprised, smiling as he reached for his work ID. "Just a delivery, ma'am." But the woman's eyes never met his badge. They flicked from his face to his uniform, to his hands, as if scanning for a threat that existed only in her imagination. Behind her, another door opened. Then another. Within moments, the stillness of the afternoon thickened into a silent meeting of suspicion. Marcus felt that chill, the one every black man knows too well, an ancient, familiar warning humming beneath his ribs. You're being watched. He waved politely and headed toward his van, but the whispering grew louder. Phones lifted. A man's voice joined in. "Hey, what are you doing here?" The tone wasn't curious. It was accusatory, laced with something heavier. Marcus kept his steps even. He'd done this job long enough to know how quickly fear could twist a scene. But the air was turning against him now, thick with the taste of doubt. His pulse climbed. The sound of his boots on the pavement felt deafening. He reached for the driver's side door just as flashing lights broke the edge of the block. A single cruiser rolled up, blue and red washing over his van. Neighbors stepped out now, all drawn to the spectacle they believed they had saved themselves from. Marcus froze, palms visible, the weight of the world pressing on his shoulders. The officer stepped out, hand already resting on his holster. "Sir, we got a call about suspicious activity." Suspicious. Marcus bit the inside of his cheek. He explained calmly, carefully, his ID trembling just a little in his grip. He named the company, the address, the signature required, but every word felt like he was asking permission to exist. Seconds stretched. The officer's eyes darted to the van, to the neighborhood, back to Marcus. The radio squawked, distant and sharp. Another cruiser turned the corner. The moment dragged long enough for shame to settle in, a familiar bitter taste that came not from guilt, but from expectation. Marcus stood still, waiting for his own truth to be believed. Behind him, someone muttered, "Told you he didn't belong here," and in that instant, the world tilted. What began as an ordinary delivery had turned into a public trial. No jury, no defense, just suspicion in broad daylight. The flash of sirens painted Marcus in stuttering bands of red and blue. He stood motionless, the late sunlight outlining him as if he'd been carved into the scene. frozen, like every wrong assumption that had led to this moment. "Step away from the vehicle," the officer ordered. The voice was steady, rehearsed, the tone of someone convinced of danger. Marcus lifted his hands slowly. His fingertips trembled in the heat, the air thick enough to choke on. In that instant, he wasn't Marcus, the father who loved old jazz records, or the man who double-checked every address to avoid mix-ups. He was just a silhouette under suspicion, a subject, a threat. Another officer arrived, muttering into his radio. The neighbors stood behind caution-colored tape of their own making, arms crossed, lips sealed, phones gleaming. The same people who waved to him last week now looked through him as if they'd never met. One wrong breath could unravel everything. Marcus watched the officer edge closer, hand hovering near his weapon. The metallic click of a thumb release split the silence. Sharp, unforgiving. That sound cut deeper than any insult. "Sir, I need you to remain still," the officer said again. "I am still," Marcus whispered, though his voice barely crossed the space between them. Sweat traced the line of his spine. He could feel every heartbeat ricocheting between fear and fury. A child's voice broke the stillness, a small voice from across the yard. "Mom, that's the delivery man. The one who brings our packages." The words hung in the air, soft but seismic. For a second, everything stopped. The officer's stance, the crowd's murmurs, even the hum in Marcus's head. Recognition hit like sunlight after endless storm clouds, but it wasn't relief that followed. It was exhaustion, the kind that comes from carrying proof of your innocence on your skin every single day. As the officer finally lowered his hand, Marcus's chest rose, heavy with something beyond relief, a hollow victory carved by humiliation, because even if he could leave now, everyone had already decided what he was before he ever spoke a word. Marcus finished the route that day, but the rhythm was gone. The simple joy of the road, the hum of tires, the smell of cardboard, the small smiles exchanged over doorsteps, now carried a bitter edge. When he saw front porches, he no longer thought of names or addresses. He thought of suspicion waiting behind glass. He told no one at first. What could he say that hadn't already been said 1,000 times in 1,000 places? The police report would call it a misunderstanding. The neighbors would call it vigilance. Only Marcus would know the truth. That silence and fear had chimed together like church bells in that suburban afternoon, tolling for something larger than him. Still, the next morning he climbed back into his van. Because bills waited, because his children needed to see what resilience looks like, but also because walking away would have meant surrendering the space that told him he didn't belong, and he refused to give it that power. Days passed, yet the memory stuck like gravel beneath his ribs. He replayed the moment again and again, the eyes, the doubt, the click of a holster, and wondered how thin the line really was between a routine stop and a tragedy with a name on the news. The world scrolls past stories like his every day. But each is a signal, warning that we live in a place where even doing everything right can still be read as wrong when your skin carries history. Marcus's story isn't unique. That's what makes it unbearable. It's the proof that progress without empathy is just decoration. He made it home that night. Not unharmed, just unseen. So the question for us isn't whether this could happen again. It's why, after all this time, it still does.